All right, so let's talk a little bit about adjustment layers. So, with adjustment layers, they're a way for us to start to adjust the picture in a way that's also going to be non-destructive. So, we just talked about the layer masks and why they're so great and why doing things that are non-destructive is really important. And when we start to adjust the color or change the image, we also don't want to modify or you know throw out pixels because we need all of that original information so that if we change our mind about something that we can go back. So let me just show you a quick example. So this is the picture that we're going to take and put into one of our illustrations, and it's a still frame from the movie, right? So in some of the tutorials that we did, they taught us to go image adjustment, and I'm just going to do something like um, let's do levels, because this one is kind of visual, right? So what it has here is what's called the histogram, and this is like the distribution of all of our values, right? So this goes from all the blacks on one end over here, and then all the lights over here. And so levels is one of the ways that I can go in and I can start to adjust things, right? So I might go, oh, well, it needs to be a little bit lighter, but then I want the blacks to be a little bit blacker, so it has a little more detail, and I want, this to be a little bit hotter in the highlights, right? That might be great. And I go, that looks perfect. Okay, great. Okay. So then if I, work with this for a bit and I do some other things and I'm ready to take it into the other document, or I bring it to the other document and I change my mind, I go, oh, you know what, it's a little bit too hot, or, I don't want those blacks quite so blocked up. If I go in and I say, well, I'm just going to make an adjustment then, and I'm going to go ahead and go into levels, you'll notice that a whole section of my histogram has gone away, right? It's flattened out quite a bit, and there's these big chunks that are kind of missing. And that's because when I made those adjustments and I clipped it in and I adjusted those highlights and shadows, it threw away all of those pixels. And if I had moved this into another image, after I made a layer mask and brought it in, none of this original information would still be there. So that would be destructive, right? I've thrown away pixels. I've gotten rid of part of what it is that I actually need. So what we want to do instead, I'm going to hit cancel and I'm going to go back a step so that I don't lose my information. But if I move this somewhere else, I wouldn't have that ability to go back, right? So instead, there's a little button right next to the layer mask, and it says create a new fill or adjustment layer. So adjustment layers have a lot of those same options, like just like we went to image adjust, there's things like curves and there's levels and there's hue, saturation, brightness. Those are all the same. So if I went in here and instead made a levels adjustment, I've got my beautiful histogram again, and I can make it a little bit lighter, and I can crop and bring in those blacks, and I can make, clip that top end and make it a little bit hotter. And, you know, when I come back to my histogram, notice this time nothing's changed. Right? All the information is still there. And if I go, oh, well, I don't want those blacks so black, I can just pull them back down. I can make it a little bit, and maybe I want it to be more moody, and I come in here and I make it more moody, and I make those highlights not quite so hot, right? It doesn't really matter. Whatever I do, I can come back at any point, and I can come back by clicking on the little histogram part or the little picture. Each icon will be slightly different. But I can come back here and go, oh, yeah, no, that's not what I want. I want it to be back over in here, and that's the way that I want it to look. So it's re-editable all the time, right? So that's a good way to go. Notice when I make an adjustment layer, not only does it allow me to re-edit that, it also creates a layer mask. So I might decide, well, yeah, I like the way it looks over here, but this part's getting too bright. I can always hide that color change from happening, right? So again, white reveals, black conceals. So I could paint in black up here on my layer mask, and none of that color change is going to happen in those areas. Or I might decide, well, his jacket gets too dark, so I can come in there and adjust that. And notice wherever there's black, it's stopping that change from happening. So you can see it's making this shift in other areas, but it's holding back the change from some of the areas that I've now masked, right? So that's the adjustment layer, and there's lots of them. So I might also decide, well, this needs to be black and white. So I might go in here and decide, well, I'm going to make it black and white. When I do that, it converts it to black and white. But it still has the color, right? So underneath this black and white image is a color picture, right? So the nice thing about the black and white adjustment is I can go by hues, right? So if I can look in here, there's a lot of red and purple, right? So if I go in here, I can take the reds and decide, well, do I want the reds darker? Then it'll make anything that's red darker. Or do I want the reds lighter, right? There's lots of that kind of purpley magenta color. So I might go, well, maybe I can shift the magenta in his jacket and make that a little bit brighter so it stands out. Or maybe I make it a little darker so it sits back a little bit. Same with the blues. I can go in there and I can adjust the blues. So now I get a little more detail, in this part of his coat, and get some separation. Then maybe I can afford to make those magentas a little bit darker. The yellows are going to be kind of skin tone, so I might be able to bring those back up a little bit and brighten them. So I've got a lot of adjustment I can make inside of that adjustment as well. So again, there's our color and there's our black and white. And again, because it's an adjustment layer, it hasn't done anything to the pixel. If I convert it to black and white and take it over to my other image, I'll never have the color part a part of it. It'll always just be black and white. So there's our adjustment layers. Now, sometimes I do only want part of it, especially when we have multiple layers. We may only want it to affect a small part of it. There is a button right here which is called a clipping mask. And so when we're in multiple layered documents, so like say for instance, when we're working in this poster, this black and white adjustment that I have here, if I don't have that clipping mask on, everything becomes black and white, right? So I don't really want everything to go black and white because there was like color and tone inside of there. So when I apply that clipping mask, it'll only affect the layer that's below it, right? So here's my layer here, and I've made a mask of my image. Again, that's so that it doesn't have that top building, right? I didn't need that building, so I'm disabling that mask. So there's my mask so that I just have them cut out. And if I don't want everything going black and white, then when I'm on my black and white layer, I can use this clipping mask, and now the color, the sepia color, is still in that background. Okay. The other one that I want to spend a little bit of time explaining is this color fill one. So once I've got my illustration here, notice there's several types of color, right? There's kind of this yellowy color of this picture. This one's a little bit more red. This one's a little bit more brown. They don't have any color because they're just black and white. So what I want to do is kind of equalize the overall color tone so it just has one sepia tone. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and delete this one. And I'm going to create a new solid color. So when I do that, it fills with whatever was my foreground color. In this case, it happened to be black. I don't know exactly what the color is that I want, so I'm just going to kind of pick something that's kind of near the hue that I think I want, and I'm going to say OK. Now, it was solid color, so it's completely solid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to blend this. Now, we used blending modes before when we did our rule of thirds, right? We brought in the grids, and then we dropped out that white part. So we're going to go up here where it says normal, and at the very bottom, the second from the bottom, it says color. What that's going to do is it's going to allow the color to stay, but it's going to keep all of the black and white values that are going to kind of underlie it. So if it's black, we won't see much color. If it's 100% white, we won't see much color. But anything that's in between, then this color is going to lay over top of it. So I'm going to say color. So now I've got my whole picture. It's all uniformly this one color. Now, it's not exactly the color that I wanted. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and turn the eyeball off for a second so I can see the natural sepia tones that were part of Eugene Otjay's pictures. And so I'm going to go ahead and switch it. So I'm going to click on this with a little double click. That brings up my color picker. But I want to sample one of the browns that are already existing in my picture. And these seem like they're kind of, let's take one that's kind of in this area. So let's try to find like a medium toned color. Maybe kind of in this area over here. So when I click it, it doesn't matter where I go. Wherever I click, it's going to pick up that color that it sees. Okay. If I decided I wanted it to be more of, in this hue, or if I want it to be a little bit more of that yellowy, I can pick anywhere inside of there. Once I choose that and say OK, it's going to then go ahead and apply that to the whole picture. So now all of that picture has that yellowy color. And again, if I wanted something that was a little bit more of kind of in that reddish hue, I could go ahead and sample something from over in this area instead and say okay and go ahead and apply that. And so it'll have that tone, but now it's more uniform. So it doesn't have all this blotchiness of this one's slightly different color than that one. And so now it all has that same sort of a sepia tone.